He had lived alone in his small cabin for many years. The land around him stretched wide and empty, dotted with trees and low hills, and sometimes it seemed as if no one had ever set foot there before. His days were quiet, spent tending to his small garden, chopping firewood, and taking care of the few animals he kept. Life had been hard, and loneliness had become his closest companion. He was used to it now, the way the wind whispered through the trees and the way the stars lit the sky at night. But even in his solitude, he had learned to notice the small joys of life, the sound of a bird's song in the morning, the smell of fresh bread baking, and the warm glow of the fireplace at night. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, he heard a soft sound near the edge of his property. At first, he thought it was the wind or one of the deer moving through the brush, but then he saw her. She was walking slowly, her movements careful as if she didn't want to make a sound that might disturb him. She was an Apache woman, known in the nearby settlement for her strength and independence. She carried herself with quiet confidence. Yet there was something gentle in the way she looked at him, almost like she was weighing whether it was safe to approach. He stepped outside his cabin, unsure what to expect. The woman paused a few feet away, her eyes scanning the cabin and the surrounding land. Then she spoke, her voice calm but carrying a hint of curiosity. "Are you alone in your cabin?" she asked. He nodded, a small smile forming. "Yes, I am," he said, "just me. You're welcome to come in." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping closer. There was an air of caution about her, but it was balanced by a sense of trust. She removed her outer cloak, folding it neatly as she entered. Her clothes underneath were simple, traditional but well kept, showing pride in her heritage. The rancher gestured toward the fireplace, inviting her to sit. She accepted, settling into a chair while he took a seat across from her. They began to talk, first about the land and the weather. She told him about the challenges she faced, traveling between her home and the settlement and the difficulties of living in a harsh environment. He listened carefully, nodding and asking gentle questions, showing that he cared about her experiences. He offered her water from the pitcher on the table, and she accepted with a small smile. As the conversation continued, they shared more about themselves. He spoke of his years on the land, the hard work and the quiet satisfaction of tending to his small farm. She spoke of her family, the Apache traditions, and the sense of duty that came with being responsible for those she cared for. Each story revealed more about who they were, and slowly the tension between them eased. She laughed softly at a story he told about a stubborn horse that refused to follow his instructions. Her laughter was light, almost musical, and it made him smile in a way he hadn't smiled in years. In return, she shared a story about a young colt she had helped care for, and he listened, fascinated by her skill and the gentleness with which she treated the animal. At one point, she shifted slightly, reaching to untie a sash around her waist. It was a natural, casual movement, showing that she felt comfortable enough to adjust her clothing in his presence. He noticed, but he remained respectful, focusing on her words rather than her movements. She had come seeking conversation and understanding, and he was determined to offer that. They continued talking late into the evening. He offered her some bread he had baked earlier that day, and she accepted gratefully. They shared the food quietly, savoring the simple taste, and it felt like a small celebration of trust and companionship. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people sharing a moment of connection in an otherwise quiet world. Outside, the wind blew softly, rustling the trees and carrying the distant call of an owl. Inside, the cabin felt warm and alive with conversation and laughter. They spoke of hopes and fears, of memories that were bittersweet, and of the small joys that kept life meaningful even in solitude. He found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years, speaking of moments of loneliness and the quiet beauty he had discovered in his life. She listened, nodding and offering her own reflections, and he realized that in her presence he didn't feel so alone anymore. Time passed, and the evening shadows grew longer. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across the cabin. She shared tales of her family and the customs she held dear, and he told stories of his ancestors and the land he had tended for so long. They discovered that despite their different backgrounds, they shared similar values: hard work, respect for nature, and the importance of caring for those around them. She asked him about the stars visible through the cabin window, pointing out constellations that were familiar to her. He listened, intrigued by her knowledge and the way she connected with the night sky. They spoke of the future in quiet, hopeful terms, imagining days when life might be less lonely, when there might be companionship and shared purpose. By the time the moon rose high, both of them felt a sense of comfort that neither had expected. She adjusted her clothing again, a simple movement that showed ease and familiarity in his presence. He offered her a blanket to keep warm, and she accepted, smiling softly. There was no rush, no expectation, only the quiet understanding that they had found something rare. Trust and friendship in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. Before leaving, she thanked him for his hospitality and for listening. He walked her to the door, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness that their time together was ending for the night. She nodded, promising to return the next day, and he watched her disappear into the darkness, the moonlight catching the edges of her cloak as she walked away. After she left, he sat by the fire thinking about the evening. He realized that in meeting her, he had found a spark of connection he hadn't known he was missing. It wasn't just her presence, it was the way she had shared her stories, the respect she had shown, and the simple kindness of her company. For the first time in many years, he felt a sense of hope, a feeling that perhaps life could hold moments of unexpected friendship, even in the loneliest places. The night grew deep, and the cabin was quiet once more, but it felt different. There was a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement for what tomorrow might bring. He knew that she would return, and with her, more conversation, more shared stories, and perhaps the beginnings of a bond that could last far longer than a single evening. And as he closed his eyes by the fire, he felt a warmth in his chest, a reminder that even in solitude, human connection could be found in the most unexpected ways. The next morning, the rancher woke to the soft light of dawn spilling through the small window of his cabin. The fire from last night had long since burned down to glowing embers, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb the peacefulness of the early day. Today he felt a little more alive, as if the visit from the Apache woman had opened a door he hadn't realized was closed for so long. He stepped outside and looked over his small farm. The animals were stirring, the chickens clucking softly and the horses shifting in their pens. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant hills. It reminded him of why he had chosen this life in the first place: peace, quiet, and the chance to live simply. Yet he also realized how much he had missed the sound of another voice, the comfort of shared company. Not long after, there was a soft knock at the cabin door. He opened it to find her standing there again, dressed simply and carrying a basket of supplies. She smiled, her eyes bright with the same quiet confidence he had noticed yesterday. "Good morning," she said. "I thought I could help you with your chores today." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Good morning," he replied. "I would appreciate the help. There's plenty to do." Together, they moved through the day with an easy rhythm. She helped him feed the animals, brush the horses, and mend fences that had loosened from the wind or time. He showed her how he kept the small garden, explaining the work he did to grow vegetables and herbs. She listened intently, asking questions and offering her own tips, drawn from her own experiences on the land. It was during these quiet moments that a deeper connection began to form. They laughed at small mistakes, like when a horse nudged her gently, causing her to stumble, or when a bucket of water tipped slightly and spilled onto the ground. He noticed the warmth in her smile and the way she encouraged him when a task seemed difficult. In return, she noticed his patience, his steady hands, and the gentle care with which he treated both animals and plants. As the day moved on, they sat down to share a simple lunch. She had brought a few ingredients from her home, and together they prepared a meal over the small stove. The smell of cooking filled the cabin, mixing with the aroma of fresh herbs from his garden. They spoke quietly as they worked, exchanging stories about family, friends, and the simple pleasures of life. The rancher found himself opening up in ways he hadn't for years. He spoke about his childhood on a distant farm, the lessons he had learned, and the long hours he had spent tending to his own land. She listened with a careful attention, nodding and responding with empathy. In turn, she shared tales of her people, the traditions she held dear, and the responsibilities she carried for her family. Each story added depth to the bond growing between them, each word weaving a connection that felt rare and precious. After lunch, they took a short break by the edge of the small creek near the cabin. He dipped his hands into the cool, flowing water and she followed, letting the current wash over her fingers. They watched the water move over stones, laughing at the way it sparkled in the sunlight. The moment was quiet yet full of meaning. There was no rush, no urgency, only the gentle unfolding of friendship and trust. As the afternoon continued, they worked together to repair a broken fence. The rancher showed her how to tie knots, how to measure and secure the posts, and how to make the fence strong enough to withstand both wind and animal weight. She picked up the tasks quickly, surprising him with her skill and precision. He admired her ability to adapt and learn, and she admired his patience and willingness to teach without judgment. Through these shared labors, he realized that he had come to rely on her presence more than he expected. It wasn't just the physical help, though, that was valuable. It was the sense of companionship, the feeling that he was not alone in his work or in his life. She too seemed to appreciate the quiet strength he offered, the way he guided her without taking over, and the calm steadiness he brought to the day. As evening approached, they returned to the cabin, tired but satisfied. The sky had turned shades of pink and orange, the sun dipping behind the hills in a gentle farewell. They sat by the fire, letting the warmth seep into their tired bodies. She pulled her cloak closer around her shoulders and he noticed a small, thoughtful smile on her face. They didn't need many words. The silence was comfortable, filled with shared understanding and quiet joy. She reached into her basket and pulled out a small bundle of herbs she had gathered from the forest earlier in the day. "These might help with the aches in your shoulders," she said. He accepted them with gratitude, touched by the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. They worked together to prepare a simple herbal remedy, sharing stories and laughter as they went. Later, they spoke of dreams and hopes, the kind of conversation that comes late in the evening when the world is quiet, and the fire is the only light. He told her about the life he had imagined when he first moved to this land, and she shared the aspirations she held for herself and her family. They found that despite their differences, they had much in common: strength, resilience, and a desire for connection in a world that often felt lonely. Night fell, and the stars appeared, twinkling above the cabin like tiny lanterns in the sky. They stepped outside for a moment, enjoying the cool night air and the sound of crickets and rustling leaves. She pointed out constellations, telling him the stories that had been passed down through her family for generations. He listened in awe, fascinated by the history and meaning behind each pattern in the sky. By the end of the evening, they had formed a bond deeper than either had anticipated. It was a connection based on respect, trust, and the simple joy of shared company. There was no rush to define it further. They simply enjoyed the presence of each other, knowing that friendship and understanding were rare treasures in a world that often offered only solitude. She prepared to leave for the night, but not before thanking him again for his kindness and the warmth of his home. He walked her to the door, feeling a quiet pride in the companionship they had built over the day. "I'll return tomorrow," she said, her voice soft but certain. "There is still so much to share and to do." He nodded, smiling, and watched as she disappeared into the night, the moonlight catching her cloak as she moved through the darkness. Once she was gone, he returned to the cabin, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The work of the day, the laughter they shared, and the simple acts of kindness had filled a void he hadn't realized was so deep. That night, as he sat by the fire, he thought about the quiet bond that had formed between them. It was not a bond built on haste or expectation, but on mutual respect, shared effort, and understanding. It was rare and precious, and he treasured it fully. He realized that even in the most isolated places, human connection could be found, and that sometimes the presence of another person, someone who listened, who shared, and who cared, could transform life in ways that nothing else could. He fell asleep with a sense of peace, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of work, conversation, and companionship. He had found not just a helper or a neighbor, but a true friend, someone whose presence made the quiet land feel alive. And in that quiet, unspoken way, he knew that life had become brighter, warmer, and more full than it had been in years.